First thing I'd like to declare is that there's no such thing as a scientific attitude, really. And so, scientific attitude means the ability to inquire without a pre-established set, and no one has that. So whenever you look at anything, you have a set with which you look at the thing, which renders the attitude non-scientific. You can't have a scientific attitude if you have a set, and everyone has a set. No. In order to be scientific, it would mean with the widest possible range of inquiry. For example, if you found a radioactive material prior to the knowledge of its penetrating effects, you couldn't inquire into the damage of radioactive materials. Because I think many years ago, some guy accidentally held his hand in front of an apparatus and he got a shadow of the skeletal structure. And he held his hand and he said, it doesn't hurt at all. And years later, dentists had their fingers began to peel. They used to hold the x-ray in your mouth and they all began to go because you can't inquire into something that you don't have enough information on. So to have a scientific attitude, to inquire into the nature of things, for example, what is the nature of things? Both the nature of some things are outside of your frame of reference. If you don't have knowledge of gamma rays or particular, let's say that they use ultrasonic drills in teeth, but that causes cavitation in the gum linings and causes cells to rupture, but they didn't know that. Okay? And so years later, or months later, you have another effect. That's called a negative retroaction. You can't get to that until you do the first thing. So it's like a lot of pills that people have been taking, and then 5 years later or 10 years later you have another effect. So how can a person be scientific? What does scientific mean? Well, it means whatever the hell it means in the guy's mind that uses the word. So no one is scientific. Now in order to do that, in order to generate an attitude, here's what we're talking about. Degrees of appropriateness is what scientists are trying to talk about. Degrees of appropriateness. And now we'll move from there. How do you set up degrees of appropriateness? By working on a special process or project which runs something like this. I'm going to use old language because a new language would not elicit the appropriate response. The old language is to try to imagine situations that are highly improbable and very strange and far out. I use the term science fiction. The more, in other words, I mentioned in one of these sessions, I don't know how many of you were present, that if you take two pictures, the old-time stereoscope, you saw pictures in 3D. But if you superimpose the plates, the right eye vision to the left side, left eye vision to the right side, what happens, the face inverts itself. The eyes, instead of going in, they go out. And the nose goes in instead of out. You know, and every stereoscopy is reversed. That's a very strange thing. If you looked at a tree, for example, instead of the branches going out, they would go into themselves. If a guy were pointing at you, you'd see it like he shoved your hand into clay and made a negative image. A good basis for science fiction is reverse stereoscopy, especially if you looked at the structure of a tree inverted. It's hard to imagine those things. And so what you have to do is imagine, meaning make up, forces, fields, strange things in your own head. As many things as you can, which is very difficult to do because our habits of thought are associatively established. But by crossing it, we're also in school, we look like a lot of little balls rolling down a table as we go to school, and some of the little balls tend to roll off the table, meaning explore in special domains. Like you see a child in the backyard with a lollipop stick smashing shit and spreading it out, we begin to interfere. And anytime there's any probing, I mentioned at a restaurant tonight in discussion how you can get to discuss sex on television and radio by discussing things like the planets. In other words, if I got on the air and began to talk about astronomy, and he said, well, what about the moons of Jupiter? And I said, well, I'd rather not talk about that. He said, what do you mean? I said, maybe children in the moon. You see, how is it you don't talk about the nose, you talk about the ear, but the eye, the balls, the pussy, not at all. So how is it that we do that? Why don't you talk about the moons of Jupiter and not talk about a certain area? You know, you could have had a society that felt that Porter Crater was dirty on the moon. And you put an area in there, a little silk and tied it over, so nobody could see Porter Crater. See? So, and I also mentioned, I think at sessions, of a young lady driving into a gas station, and her car isn't running right, and the attendant mechanic looks at it, and he says it's a differential housing. Between the two wheels in the rear, and she said, my God, how can you talk about that part of the car in public? And so, the balls of the car, whatever you want to call it. And we have that kind of thing today. Just because your society started not talking about the earlobe in certain areas that are considered, or movies that are considered pornographic, which are really amazing. Depends on the culture. And that has to be invaded. You have to invade that area. You have to knock it out, not merely argue about the fact that we ought to talk about sex, but you ought to talk about anything at all. Any kind of ideas must be talked about. And so, to the degree that we don't, we remain subject to cancer, to all other kinds of social catastrophe, including war, jealousy, rage, crimes of passion, because we don't talk about those things. So, not talking about them is committing a crime. We have to say that the people that don't talk about those things are the criminal. Then you have to make them feel ashamed and criminal for not talking about it. You're shocked when a person doesn't talk about infected balls on the air. You see? In other words, you have to reverse the role to almost embarrass the bigots. Okay? It's like you don't have a Negro for coffee. It's the same sort of thing. And see, of course, you never have a Filipino near your buildings. And so you go on with that kind of thing and make it preposterous. Getting back to the stereoscope, you get an inverted image or you get a strange image. Now, because the stereoscope does that, what would happen if you took the right-hand image and the left-hand image and reversed them and turned one upside down? Well, sometimes you get a hand sticking out and a hand sticking in, both. And that gives you ground for science fiction. It opens up the possible areas of inquiry. But the habits of thought of the research institutions, we talk a little bit about scientific research, of which does not exist. Scientific research, some guy mixing some shit together, walks into the restaurant, this is a chemist, and he's eating everything. He said, my God, they put a lot of sugar on everything, bright and everything, it's so sweet. And he was piddling around with some strange mixture, sucralol or something like it, and he wasn't looking for it. He got a little bit of this powder on his finger, and everything tastes very sweet. But nobody sat down and invented it, and that's not science. That they call that serendipity. You encounter something. And I mentioned also, to put a man on the moon, you have to sit back and ask what the problems are. And then you design equipment to meet those problems, which is quite different than medical research. In medical research, they pour some shit on a cancer cell, watch, it turns green, and nothing happens. They pour some additional shit on it, and it goes under the sophistication of biochemistry. Biochemistry is a series of accidents, which you mix things together and you notice a lot of things don't work, then you write a book. And they put in all the things that worked. That's how a guy becomes an ordered chemist. Because he doesn't know what the fuck he's doing, nor does he know what he's looking for. And the idea is it might be possible to build hypothetical structures of a wide variety, and then attempting to account for events in the hypothetical structures that are far afield. Okay? All right. Now, I think I also mentioned, in order to understand this well, when you take a magnifying glass and you put it on a block of ice, which I've mentioned, which this is always an interesting type thing, you can melt the center of the ice if you're focusing on the center. It becomes fluid in the center and the rest is cool all around. And I also mentioned this at other sections, that the sun may not be a source of energy at all, as a hypothetical structure. Now, when you mention that to any physicist or scientist, and they say, well, who the hell are you? Rather than saying, how do you mean that? Which is most interesting. If a person makes an odd statement like that, that would call for inquiry. Then you drop the person. If the inquiry doesn't make sense. Now, let's try that again. Here's a gigantic lens, and here's a point in space that lens is focused on, and that point is radiating heat galore, because there's 10 units of heat in each ray, and right here they're all focused. So if you lived out here, flew around, it'd be relatively cool, a little warmer here, but hotter as you went into that. And this isn't the source of energy. That is. The sun may be some focal point in space of, let me call it Z-beams, that come into a certain form of matter and re-radiate. Like X-rays represent a cathode ray beam in a glass tube hitting a hard plate of tungsten. Coming out of that is alpha, beta, and gamma rays. There's nothing in this, no penetrating rays. That's called secondary radiation, which the product is after the cathode ray, which is not penetrating, hits a hard metal, then it becomes penetrating. Now, the sun may be no source of energy at all. It may be a focal point, like this lens. Anybody with difficulty there? Now, orthodox persons, my God, how can you propose that? Everybody knows that the sun is a nuclear furnace. A nuclear furnace may not be a source of energy. But we're so conventionalized in our habits of thought, it's hard to break the pattern, which proves conditioning. Now, I never broke the pattern either. I just ran into events that broke the pattern. I don't break patterns. And so if you imagine things like that, which science fiction is good, it's good because you can go astray. You can write about a strange world that had strange values. But if you try to do it in the Scientific American, just write an article on odd thoughts I've been having about the nature of nature. They won't print it. They won't print it because they want to know the orthodoxy of the structure of the person that wrote it, rather than, hey, these are some interesting ideas, let's call it pseudoscience, and put it in under that heading. But the real interesting thing about it is that sometimes the least suspecting system may be one of the major factors in the development of cancer. Not necessarily friction, not necessarily irritants. It could be a combination of body chemistry, plus a number of other things. And I mentioned also in the past that there may not be ultimately a cause for anything. There may be a whole lot of interacting variables that may generate cancer. Not a cause. A little fucking blue cell with a pink tip. You see, there it is. That's the cause of cancer. Because they know that in some instances, a cancerous growth remission will occur. It'll get smaller and smaller and smaller, and they scratch their heads, and that's the most fascinating thing. What is that? What went on there? That becomes a person you want to collect. Not everybody, all the samples of the tissue of the people that died, but the remission people. These are the guys you call in. You make a loud noise on the drum, it doesn't bother him at all. He sings and he reads and he does his homework. There's the guy you want to study. But the person that's uptight, they're studying that person. There's nothing to study there. He's solved the problem. Now you want to get hold of situations that are far out. Now, of course, metaphysics is a stimulus. It's a stimulus in this sense. The guy talks of sitting on a rug and flying around. See, like I mentioned in other sessions, he sits with his legs folded, a turban, and maybe a bowl of fruit. But it doesn't tell you what he did when it rained on the rug, or if he had to take a leak or a shit when he flew around the rug. Where your modern airliners have shit houses and cooking and television and everything else, and this guy is kind of riding a lousy rug. And, you know, it gets dusty, it's windy up there, and bird shit. But in an airliner, it's more than the rug. But the idea that it was a fascinating and far-out idea, of course, considered impossible at the time, which we surpassed. Sometimes in metaphysics they say, if only I can read a person's mind, or I can read a person's mind. And then the person goes to work on trying to predict human behavior. The stimulus might be mind reading. The stimulus for an idea where a person says, I will that plant to grow, and the plant grows. I will that plant not to grow. The guy sits over the plant, he wills it not to grow. Now he holds the seeds in his hand and he wills that seed with anger not to grow. Certain acids are secreted in the skin, which may inhibit the growth of that seed. And when he picks up another seed with a dry hand and puts it in the ground, what he wills to grow, grows. But the scientist, or the guy trained differently, might check this, the secretion in the skin and the effect on the seed. The metaphysician just walks off and says, how I will seeds to grow. Does no research at all. And he says, I wish you a bad year. And he walks out of the house and hit by a Mack truck. And people do that all the time. 1,000 curses upon your soul. I'm sure some people get it occasionally. So what we have to do is try to find out, or try to get into the habit of venturing outside the conventional frame of reference. Now, if you do that sexually, you're a pervert. In other words, if I were to lick a cherry tree first and then make love, my girlfriend would say, oh my God, now what the hell's the function of that? And I said, what the hell's the function of sucking on a tit? I don't get any cherry flavor. I mean, the whole lot, sucking on a tit is just as preposterous as sucking on a cherry, except I've been conditioned. And I know that's preposterous. But because I've been conditioned, it doesn't make it right or valid. That's what I'm trying to say. So whatever kind of behavior people engage in related to whatever activity of the future might be interesting and certainly different. But it's very hard to say this is the way you do that and this isn't the way you do it. That's why I mentioned at other sessions, a handbook on sex is preposterous because it's about that culture and that subculture's views regarding sex. And if sex is conditioning, how can there be appropriateness? In other words, how can you talk about stimulating areas of the body when if a frog crawled in your pussy and moved around, you become repelled? You know what I mean? My God, how disgusting. You just don't sit back and say, all right, that's a stimulating area, and the frog hops around in there, and you say, it's just horrific. Whether it's a guy's finger or a frog, it's a series of sensations, isn't it? But we're not that rational nor logical, okay? Now suppose I wanted some girl to get down on me, and to design some piece of equipment that does that. You know, and I'm sitting there, and he says, but it's not a girl. He says, I can't tell the difference. I would be in an institution. So the idea is some structure is always set down, a procedure. And all of us look at that procedure before we do a goddamn thing. Grab a handful of tit, then stroke the hair, touch the left breast. It's so fucking synthetic, you know what I mean? It's synthetic like everything else is in the culture. I don't know what right or wrong or good or bad is or anything of the kind. However, if I had such patterns as that, I certainly wouldn't go around announcing it. Because what would happen is society doesn't say, how interesting, a variable, new systems, like to know more about. Instead, they say, let me tell you about that guy. But they don't tell you about what the guy said. They just tell you about the kind of deviation. Unfortunately, I'm straight normal. Unfortunately, because I'm prejudiced and bigoted. But I think that there are patterns that people will explore in the future. But they won't say this is right. They'll say, hey, I tried something very interesting, and it worked for me. And then people try it, and they say, Jesus, it doesn't work for me. Then they find a person that it works for, and it works for them. But the idea of writing a book, no, no, yes, yes, different pattern, thinking that your patterns are the only one. There was a time when the landowner of a village and the people in it would have to have sex relations with the first girl that was going to get married in that village to try her out. And that was a normal thing. You brought your daughter to the chief, and he screwed her, and then you went off, and she got married. And the guy, he got second chance, you see. Now, that was the normal procedure. It'd be shocking to go to bed with your wife while having the chief of the village do it. Shocking to a lot of people. Now, what about all our conventional habits of thought? What kind of a file system are you going to build? The conventional habits of thought lead us into this trap, a lousy trap. And the trap is that we think or react along the lines that we've been brought up in. And even if we try to listen to new values, it goes into the filing system and it's sorted out automatically, like this system here, where they have a channel here, and they have a bunch of balls that roll down at different sizes. Then they have a wheel here with different size holes in it. And as the balls come through one at a time, it seems that if you just want the larger balls, or the smallest ball in the system filtered out, you have to design a special tracking channel. You ever see the thing that sorts quarters and dimes into a special slot? Well, you can design equipment like that sorts things out. Well, the human brain has rigid holes, and as things come rolling in, it sorts them out according to established order, not according to appropriateness, not scientific. Now let's try to use the word scientific. Scientific, meaning in some instances, some people use a definition of science as the methodology of determining the next most probable. Who's determining the next most probable? Next most probable to what? Next most probable what? That's vague as metaphysics. The methodology of determining the next most probable might mean this. In your head, that a building that would be acceptable in Washington for the Capitol might look like this. That may be the next most probable building for the Capitol, but it's not the most probable building to execute the office of government. It's an inefficient structure for that. So, in trying to be scientific is almost senseless. But what you can do is seek out tools for inquiry. If you seek out tools for inquiry, it runs something like this. It runs in this manner. If a person is trying to get upstairs and they hit the middle of the step, then they overstep on the corner and slip back, and you comment and you say, Jesus Christ, you clumsy oaf, don't you know how to go upstairs? That is what we call that noise, pure noise. Because there's no information. The person may have damaged vision, they may not see, their parallax may be off, they may see the steps distorted, you don't know anything about that. So our immediate comment is, you're full of shit, you jerk, how the hell do you want to get the steps that way? And if you associate with normal people, their language is like that constantly. Let me tell you what he did the other day. Well, what am I doing that for? If he did something inappropriate the other day, if he tried to get a dollar bill in a coin machine, to get a gumball, I would say that he's lived in some other area, or else he looks at that gumball machine differently than I do. Or there's what we call less appropriate action to get the gumball out. Now the next thing is to inquire into the man. You find out that half his brain has been eaten away. And then you know. Or else his eyes are damaged. Or else he's not of this culture. Come from another culture. But he's dressed to look like one of us. We don't do that. We come at people and say, well, I don't like Bill and I don't like George. I don't know what it is, but that's the way it is. George is a likable person. How can George be a likable person? You can only say that you like George. You can say that you like Alan. And she says, my God, I wouldn't dance with that guy. He steps on my toes all the time. Well, it has nothing to do with anything. Anytime you discuss people, you're wasting your time. Anytime you discuss the conduct of people with a value, you're wasting your time. If you want to get along with people, don't discuss anything personal. That is, if you say, do you want to go eat tonight? You say, what kind of food do you prefer? He says, fish, a lobster house. I says, well, I myself do not enjoy seafoods. So I'll see you after the lobster house at the movie theater, see the place we agree to go. Now, if he gets up and says, you're a goddamn killjoy. You never want to go where I want to go. Now, this is a question again of values. It's like a Jap walking over when Richard is speaking to him in English and goes, jabba, 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 jabba. Why don't you say something that makes sense? And that's what happens when we talk about human systems. Human systems are so far afield at their best, they're incorrect. Human systems that are ordered and right are wrong. That's what I'm trying to tell you. And there's nothing that a human can say that makes any sense. It's always cultural reflection. It's a big fat mirror. You throw a ping pong ball at it and it bounces off. You go to Africa, and the guy's name is Mambuza. There's 10 million others. There's a guy named John. In this country, there are 8 billion Johns. And if you attempt to call a guy Z44, they're shocked, like a million bills. And if you call a guy Z44, I told you it meant interested in music, art, poetry, whatever the hell it is. But Euripides Snee doesn't mean anything, except in this sense, that if you take people and say your father was a blacksmith, they called you Smith, Mr. Smith. It was simple for them. And when your son came, he was Smith's son. And that's what it's all about. You were Mrs. Baker because you were married to a baker. I'd rather be Z44. People forgot that down the line. How can you hold hands and say, I love you, Z44? How can you say, I'm in love with Carolyn? You know what I mean? What's Carolyn? Who the hell knows what it is? It could be a fish from some particular island. Years ago, we don't know where the word came from. If you go back and look at the thesaurus, before that time, it may have been something else, because dialects change. I'm sure many people are named bullshit. I'm sure. We've forgotten that. But are you familiar with the Irish fucking potatoes? I don't know if you know what I mean, do you? They used to take a stick and push it in the ground and make a hole in the ground and then put the potato in. That was called fucking. It had nothing to do with sex. But when they pulled the stick out and they saw the hole, some association was made, then it became a bad word. Suppose I go around and I say, Ibba Zibba. And he says, what does that mean? That means licking a gnat's asshole. He says, that's impossible and a terrible thing. After I tell him what it means, then I can be arrested. But if I say in Turkish on the air, fuck everybody in this community, I'm only going to get letters from the Turks. So the idea, a bad word is a word that's been established as bad. Therefore, if there are no bad words and no good words, there can't be any good or bad conduct. There can only be patterns of behavior that are less useful to a given task. If you wanted to draw and you turn the pencil upside down, you work and you curse and bitch and all that sort of thing, and he says, you simple idiot, turn it around the other way. Instead of saying that, you take the pencil, go like that, then you go like that, then you go like that, and you hand it in and you say anything. And none of you, ugh, then you put him in an institution, go to work on it. But if he doesn't get it by this, you don't need to say, you asshole, how do you expect the hard end of a person, pencil, to write on a board like that when it's the Greek? All that's not necessary. And so, most of your conversation is not necessary. If a man invents a telephone, and somebody picks it up and calls somebody in the Philippines and says, how's your sister, how do you doing? It's not a scientific invention, nor is it a social achievement, by definition. Nothing is scientific, because here you got a bunch of chemists trying to lick cancer. And if they do lick the cancer, you might get a nuclear war, which will wipe out everybody. The idea is that if this man is a head of a department that wants to use nuclear weapons and he has cancer, if you treat him and he's well, you may get nuclear war 4 years sooner. So the idea of treating anybody is senseless unless you know what kind of entity they are. There are a lot of people that want to do good. And their definition of good is when a guy walks into a hospital like that, and he walks out like that. Then he goes around beating up Jews, Negroes, and Swedes. So we have no yardstick for good or bad. And since there's no validity in being prejudiced, since science has no attitudes, if you find out that the great majority of Negroes, due to their poverty and misery, steal and lie, and you keep your kids away from Negro kids that are brought up to that value system, you're doing the operant thing. If you had a school with kids with batch of high IQ, doctors, lawyers, sons, all going to school, here you got a bunch of coal miners who don't have a library, nothing else, and 50 of their kids go to school, your kids are exposed to a lower grade environment. So the ethics of putting people together may be constitutionally correct, but it's socially damaging. Now, I'm not talking about the validity of integrated schools. I'm talking about this kind of thing. If you have a bunch of kids that have been given value systems that are difficult to live with, then a school must be designed with the best in behavioral engineering to accelerate their associative systems. And that would be for everybody. But you don't mix people together. If he is 17 years old and John's 17-year-old, he has the value system of a 9-year-old. He has the value system of a 63-year-old person, well-read. Putting them together is damaging. Not so, it's beneficial to this person, but this person will become antagonistic. Because he doesn't look forward to the person and say, my God, you've got a fantastic set of ideas. You enhance my being. He doesn't say that. He gets mad at you and trips him on the way out because he doesn't have the tools. So in order to talk about science, science can't be concerned with integration. That's a value judgment. It has to do with morality, which has to do with nothing in particular. So the concepts of morality, in other words, if you were screwing your wife in front of an open window with the lights on, is the person that accused you of doing that a peeping Tom? Well, you say, well, he had the window shade up. Why did he have it up? Well, you didn't have to look. What's a peeping Tom? Suppose I said that anybody that looks at the state of Florida, which is shaped like the devil's pecker, is a sin. And so I keep an eye looking at the devil's pecker, and I put him in jail. Your social and moral codes are absurd. There's nothing, like I said before, no standards. Now a scientist, you get a journal of science. A journal of science would have in it pages which are anti-science, which say things like this. Now these doctors claim, these psychiatrists claim that if you remove 4 feet of the intestines, it'll decrease mental disorders. They've been doing it for years in this country. There's no fat book on the errors of medicine and the stupidity of medicine. You can't buy it. It exists. Thousands of interesting cases of the orgone therapy. Remember that shit they put you in a telephone booth and orgone came in? And all kinds of nonsensical shit. You can write a book. Some early doctors, I don't know whether they developed it, the book said they developed the forceps, but they wouldn't let it get out into medicine. They just kept it in their family. So that enhanced their family's ability to operate. But they wouldn't let any other medics have it. And is that scientific? If you want to earn a living, if your end goal is to make more money than anybody else, it's scientific. Well, he says, yeah, but you should give it to everybody. Now, why doesn't NBC have a guy get up and say, this is the best toothpaste in the world? Another guy grabs it and says, you're full of shit. This is better toothpaste. Another guy gets up and says, look, no toothpaste is any good because we haven't found any evidence. See, now, no broadcasting studio is scientific. No scientific conference is scientific. The scientific would mean a wide range of inquiry. And so we don't have that yet. If anything was scientific, it wouldn't change. If this is a very advanced design, if you use that word, advanced to what? The balloon? Is it advanced to the balloon? It's like designing a spoon called an economy spoon for fat people. It's got a small hole in it. And when you pick up soup, some of it leaks out. The whole idea is what a lot of science is about today. A lot of science is about nothing in particular. Preserving some aspects of this culture. And nobody seems to want to study the past except people who are hung up in that area. The only thing you want to know about the past is roughly how we came to be what we are, either good or bad. Roughly how primitive organisms evolved, or I wouldn't say evolved, changed. Evolved is hard to say because in the next 10 years or so we'll know whether man is evolving or going downhill. We don't know what kind of society we're going to have. Because then you get a mass trend of youngsters using drugs, and then a mass trend toward metaphysics, then a certain trend toward atheism and logic and functionalism. Now, functionalism is generated by scarcity. It's functional to take a big pot and heat tons of oatmeal or soup for a lot of people. When you don't have enough coal, instead of making hundreds of little fires, you put all the stuff in a large pot and you can feed more people. And so, functionalism would be a product of scarcity. In other words, in order to feed people, you have to dehydrate the food. Instead of sending canned goods to India, you take all that stuff, dehydrate it, put it in a small package, and you can send a 9-year supply in the package rather than lots of cans and water and all that sort of crap. So, also, if you do send that to India, what are the consequences? Ultimately, they'll breed and spread, and then greater starvation will occur. Is it scientific is it scientific to develop an airplane and no airport where that can land? That's what is scientific? Is it scientific to give your kid an education to become a lawyer, which is to me a socially offensive person? No. If you make your kid an evil structure, you see, I'll give you an idea. Legally, I worked on some kind of inventions, and my patent attorney says, since the guy didn't follow through on the contract, don't divulge the nature of your invention, how it works, because then it falls in the public domain. And my lawyer said, well, you don't divulge that, we're going to lose the case. He said, God damn, I'm going to step out. Now, the way lawyers work, I have no idea. It's utterly senseless. Well, they have a book, and they work according to that book. But a patent attorney has another book, and he works according to that. And if the judge is not familiar with the patent attorney's book, he doesn't know, and you fall in the wrong. So you're living in a society that is also, an attorney will say, all I want to know is, did you say this on February the 1st or not? Yes or no? And they don't call for shades of gray, possible other meanings. They're not interested in getting ideas across. Then they become criminally offensive. But you can't get up and accuse a lawyer of being criminally offensive, because the judge doesn't sit back and say, how do you mean that? He's got a lot of other cases waiting in line. He's got a big fat book, A, B, C, D. He operates according to that robotic procedure. Or, therefore, I'm trying to say that to be scientific is extremely difficult, but to be more appropriate to a given end. Like I said, let me show you what scientific would mean by definition. I mentioned some years ago that Italians committed more crimes in New York City than anybody else. I'm talking about 35 years ago. And the mayor at the time wanted to ship all the Italians to New Jersey, because he said there'd be very little crime in New York. He's right. It's scientific. But it's rough on Jersey. and it's rough on social change. It's not really dealing with the problem of New York. Now, is the mayor of New York responsible for the problems of New York? Or responsible for the problems of America? All right. Is he scientific then to ship all the Italians out? See, the whole idea of scientific becomes ridiculous, if you know what I'm talking about. Anybody have any difficulty there? All right. Is it scientific then for a doctor who's a member of the medical arts, sometimes call himself scientific? I understand that certain types of physical disorders can cost up to $1,000 a day. Do you know what the physical disorders are? Burns. All right. Now, is that scientific? Take a guy that doesn't earn very much and tab him for $1,000 a day for 9 months? What do you mean by scientific? Is it scientific to work all your life and save up $20,000? Some people do it, 30, and then you get cancer in the last 3 months and you owe money? You've used all your savings? What is scientific? How is a scientist scientific in the lab, and then he goes out and he votes? Yeah, he's violating a terrible certificate in the lab. He said, what did I do that was wrong? You behaved unscientifically. You voted for a man because you liked him. You didn't study the qualifications of the person, so you violate the scientific method and you rip it up. Does it mean I can't practice in this town? That's right. You claim to be scientific, a scientist. You didn't say I was a scientist in the field of glass technology, other than I'm an idiot. And this guy is a scientist in the field of plastics. This man is an ophthalmologist, and he deals with disease of the eye and talk about the ear for the fucking thing. And he says that he's not a scientist. He's scientific up to a point in a given area. So stop thinking about people being scientists. And, some people are scientists and they go to church. Some people are scientific in certain areas and degenerative in other areas. They have habits of thought that are detrimental to their well-being. And so nobody draws any of those lines. They talk of, remember when I said that if an eye surgeon was very fastidious and he was working on resuturing a delicate portion of the eye, microsurgery, and he didn't like a tie that he made, and he redid it. And he did a beautiful job in it. Fastidious man. That's the kind of eye surgeon I want. But he would be, by standard definition, a compulsive person. Why does he have to take the stitch out? It's good enough. I want a compulsive person. Compulsive on watches, very delicate. It's got to be just right. The gear's got to move just well. Well, it's all right. It's adequate. Let it go. I want that kind of compulsive person when they do surgery on me. I want them to watch everything. I like that. There's certain areas we've got no use for. And if I don't like you, if you have habits that I call you compulsive. He reads the drama weekly. He gets variety. Always stage and screen. Always in that. And you are a compulsive if you're always getting camera journal, the photographic journal, the book of lenses. You're fucking neurotic. Anybody that fits into any category that's socially acceptable, anybody that studies medicine has to be some kind of mental case. Because there's a lot of things in the world that are interesting. Not only medicine, botany, astronomy, geology. How can you stop at medicine? How can a man stop at law? And so the scientific attitude does not exist. All that does exist is degrees of appropriateness in different areas. Okay, now we talk about generating a scientific attitude. Try this as a sample, just see how difficult it is. Before you got here, Richard, I talked about superimposing stereoscopic pictures in the opposite direction, the right eye picture on the left. Now what happens if a guy points, the hand inverts itself? like looking in a hollow arm with the point running the wrong way. And a face goes in instead of out. The nose goes in like a mole, see? And that kind of idea of an inverted person, and like a person walks into the background, they walk into the background in stereoscopy, and the smaller guy is up front, which is very interesting. It inverts itself. As the train goes down the track, it's getting smaller but coming forward. You know what I mean? If you ran a movie on reverse. Now that's strange. And if you get into the habit of tossing ideas like that around that are strange and far out, it generates a wider set of values regarding a wider arrangement of possibilities. All right, if we're going to have to toss our ideas around and examine human behavior, it's very hard for an Eskimo. I would say it's impossible for an Eskimo that doesn't leave anything else or leave that igloo much, except on his conventional hunts, to sit down and imagine a new kind of world. When he goes like that, it's either gigantic igloos that don't leak, lots of polar bears 9 feet high, or anything like that when he goes like, but he cannot imagine titanium. You know what I mean? He can't imagine a heart pacer, the Eskimo. A lot of people think there's a lot of things in your head that can be brought out if you concentrate. Nothing in your head can be brought out that isn't put in. And therefore, emptying a garbage can that has nothing in it gives nothing. And so, if you run the gamut of your thoughts, whatever that means, your collection of associative bits, or your set, you can only get out a combination of what's in and a recombination of occurrences that happen for what they call thinking, when you tie together lots of events that are similar. Now, the reason for cross-associative memory, a lot of people don't know why it occurs. They know that in robots, the robot will record something, and the robot will see a tree and record that. Then the robot will feel rain falling on it and record that. And after it's recorded all of these things, what robots don't do is, hey, you know, that rain was not unlike a stream of water, and not unlike a hose, and not unlike a stone crashing through a barrel. There's a little bit of similarity in the patterns. And water is not unlike blood, only it's clear. See, robots don't do that. They don't cross-associate. Now, this is what scientists have difficulty with. In computer design, they can't understand what the process is in the brain that causes that cross-association. Robots will always polish things. If you got a robot that polishes something and there's a war and it wipes out the people of the earth, it'll go right on polishing things. You know what I mean? Whereas a robot it's like the Japanese saving yen, or excuse me, after the war is lost. They still save things that have no more value because of their habits. Now, if you're going to build a robot that's going to do what you call creative thinking, original thinking, change itself, ask questions that it's never asked before, what has to be defined is the mechanisms of associative memory, just why it does that, or how it is that the brain does that. Does anybody want to venture a guess? Roughly, just a rough, what you would call imaginative guess of why robots collect linear bits and don't cross-associate? It is not programmed to cross-associate. That's a very good type description. Now, what type of program might induce cross-association? Just guess. Any wild statement? Right. Who said that?
Wouldn't it be like
similarities. Very good.
The points,
right.
Like the point sorter?
Right.
Like Bono said in his book.
Right.
You know, falling into a similar pattern.
Right.
You know, there's a recognition.
Okay. So here you have it. Here you have a thing, and the child says that's a cross. And if you do this, the child says it looks like the letter T. And when you get closer, you know it's a cross. Then if you do this, to a religious person, it might be a cross. On airplanes, a hell of a lot like a cross. Now, all things are something like something else, which I said yesterday. I said there's nothing like the writers talk about so hideous that it was beyond description. It's got to look like a frog or an alligator or an eel or something, or an octopus. But there's nothing beyond description. He looked so strange and so hideous that there are no words. His eyes were something I'd rather not say. Well, what were they? Were they like an infected asshole? Did they look like bird shit thrown against a fan? You know, it's got to look like something. Nothing is beyond description. All right. But writers make their money in running through vague areas because people say it's good. It generates imagination. I can sit back and picture my own hideous creature. And that's stimulating. Because sometimes I read something, in the early days I used to read it, and I become fascinated. Then I'd meet the author, and I'd say, what do you mean? He'd go, I don't know. It was a dope. See, he just took words, hideous, strange, cities that were self-contained, and so, what did they look like? Then he'd draw the Empire State Building on the Chrysler. In other words, there was no backup. It was just, they had a word thesaurus, you know, for city, they had other words, they stick them in there. And the guy doesn't know what the hell he's writing about. There's very few people that really know what the hell they're talking about. And so, since you have that problem in the world, you're bound to have problems with people. The whole idea of sitting down, solving problems with people is ridiculous. You can't work things out. There's nothing to work out. But you can work on physical referential things. You can make a glass that's harder, stronger, flexible, twistable. But you can't walk over to a person and say, you are too rigid. And the person says, oh yeah? You want to fight? You know, unless they come over to you and say, what do you feel is inappropriate in my values and set and ideas? Real, genuine inquiry. But if they come over and say, do you really think that there's anything wrong with my personality? They're telling you something else. You have to try to read that correctly. So what we are really interested in doing is defining what kind of an organism man is and other forms of life. And since patterns are filed in similar areas, what kind of instrument says, what would this computer have to say that this is an airplane, and this is a cross, and this is a modification of the letter T somewhere between a cross, 2% or 3% or 9%. What kind of quality would it have to be able to make the next decision? All right, use the word judgment. When is this thing here, when does this computer say, that's an airplane, and that is a bird? See? The computer has to be able to do what? Now, what does the computer have to have? It has to have
a reference.
what kind of reference? Get more detail. What?
It has to have a physical reference.
Okay. It has to discriminate, linear description of changes in a line. It has to follow the line of the system. It has to scan. And if it comes into an unusual thing like that, does it classify that as a bird, or does it look for a fan area here? Then it looks for a fan area. But in the early days, the Germans built an airplane called a Taube. Right? It looked like this. It had a bird's head on it, and it had wings like this. Now, a machine looking at a top view of a Taube, that type of airplane, it's going to then get close and look for featheriness. And then if it looks for featheriness, it's going to look for other characteristics, sound reflected from it. So for a machine to make what you call appropriate decisions, it has to have many tools of inquiry. Because if I stuffed a dog and put it in my lab in the back, and it's right at the door, the minute you open the door, the tape recording, right out of its mouth, and it's about to spring. Most people will not sit around and say, is it really a dog? Well, they usually move out. Now, what you'd have to do, is it really a dog? Meaning, are there any other things other than the appearance? Suppose the head turns slightly, and the mouth changed its angle, and there's a deep guttural sound and then a growl. That would be enough to cause most people to leave the area or spray something on it. See what I mean? But anyway, that will generate the behavior that I want. Now, a description of that. John says he ran away because there was a dog barking at him. And the truth is that John ran away. That's all. Whether it was a dog barking at him or not. He says, God damn it, I tell you there was a dog barking at him. That's why the semantic says, it seems to me there was a dog. He said, was there or wasn't there a dog? And you say to a lawyer, here, take this pen. And he grabs it and there's nothing there. He said, was there or wasn't there a pen? Could have been a virtual image. But since science is so strange today, the things it can do, that if you create an event, let's say a holographic event of a sweet old lady crossing the street and hit by a Mack truck, holographic, and 3 witnesses claim that, but the old lady disappeared. What are the 3 witnesses claiming? Once science becomes so sophisticated as to take the concept called validity and bend it, so that the person that seems to be a teletactile image, that coughs and gets some saliva on you, is not really there. What happens to science when the movies become three-dimensional, olfactory, and teletactile? What happens to description? I'm not talking about an illusion in your head where you're piping things in, where you're generating a condition out there. The whole idea is when you turn to a person and say, what happened? You always think they can tell you what happened. That's why the semanticist says it seems to me, as far as I know. Now, you can't walk around through life and the girl says, do you really love me? Well, it seems to me. He said, well, I'll get lost, do you or don't you? You live in a legal world, on or off, and there's nothing in between. And so, yes, I love many things about you. All the things about you. Well, no, just as I thought. You're not getting your food. The whole goddamn thing is so preposterous in dealing with humans that the agency of psychiatry, the fact that they can be set up, is preposterous. Because they must be set up in the context of a given civilization. Psychiatrists don't have an end goal, like overall social design to end their problem and phase themselves out. Like the guy that designed the tractors that plow the fields, are people that try to phase out the guy and the mule, and the bull, try to phase it out. So the people that work hard in the future always work hard to phase themselves out. Now, if a person says, what the hell are you working to phase yourself out for? You're not trying to phase yourself, you're trying to phase out a certain line of work that you do. All you want is the income. You don't want to work. But a lot of people get conditioned to enjoy the work because they get the income. And they work because they think they like the work. And if anybody likes the work, it just means that you become victimized, brainwashed is a term, pre-structured to behave in a certain way that society would gain, that is, a society you live in. Therefore, a smart person tries not to work at all. They try to do what they like to do and try to get out of anything that is uncomfortable. In other words, if I ran the church, I might condition the nuns to wipe my ass, because I don't like to wipe my ass. And that's what the nuns were for. In the early days, the boys lived well. And they used to scrub the floor of the churches and sing hymns, and you're the wife of Christ. And you march down there and you clean the dishes. Free service. And you get a hell of a lot of free service. You get a lot of people doing all kinds of things. They make the beds, and also then they walk down to the aisle. They don't create any havoc. They're quiet so you can read. So they work out a system. The system is criminally insane, including the guys on top that work it out as sick. So the whole idea of a society judging and trying to evaluate and place things together without an end goal is like a man building a bridge to nowhere. Jesus, he did a good job with 9 stainless steel screws and the bridge doesn't go anywhere. Well, what is this all about? What is this venture of society all about? What is science all about, since it doesn't have pre-stated goals? They're short-term goals. You build a factory, you put up smokestacks, and then it starts belching shit into the rivers and all that, and the plant was built by engineers, or was it built by criminals? Okay. So much then for the scientific attitude, and so much then for trying to discuss things with human beings. The best thing you can do with people is show them a new paper that's difficult to tear and say this has been developed and it's good for this or that purpose. But as far as talking about values and people you like and dislike, those are always troublesome subjects. Because the people you like, I may not like. You may like the guy from India. You know what I mean? I may not like the guy. I don't know. See? So when you sit down and say, well, you've got the wrong idea about that person, because you're talking about a preset attitude. Now you tell me this isn't true, that he hates anybody with an Indian flag. Because if you had a bad experience with a person with a Negro accent, if a guy came over with a Negro accent and he stabbed your mother and your wife, and for $2 that you had in their purse, and then clobbered you and dislocated your shoulder, and didn't bat an eye and ran off, and the other Negroes with him were laughing, you're going to have an attitude about Negroes, or Filipinos, or anybody, or a white man. And the judge says, well, or the humanist says, what's a humanist? The humanist says you've got to have a certain attitude. These are people, they're human beings. But you notice that the humanist doesn't live that way himself. He can't afford it. So the whole idea then about being a humanist is preposterous. Because what the humanist has to know is that all people can be brought up to have genuine concern for all other people. Until that day, it would be dangerous and erroneous to rip the locks off your door and pick up any hitchhiker. Because every time you pick up a hitchhiker, you might get your throat cut. But why take the chance? Well, not everybody's going to hurt you. You want to take that chance. There's a lot of sick people out there. So a lot of people pass by hitchhikers. He never passed by a hitchhiker. He always picked him. He's a human being on the road that wants to live. Now, When he picks him up, he says, you're a human being out on the road and you want to live. He says, I'm a member of the American Nazi Party. Get out of my car. How do you know who you're picking up? I'm not suggesting that you do or don't pick up anybody. I'm just saying that since you don't have any end goals, there's no way to know what progress means. If you don't have something that you're headed for, it's pretty hard to set a value on something. Now, if you say, well, I just want to scan and learn many things, and perhaps the end product of all of that might be some direction, that's all right, too. But if you think in terms of getting wiser or becoming right or learning to make the correct decisions, you're off beat. It's all that you deal with is degrees of appropriateness. Any questions about that? Okay, I'll just try to close or sum it up with something like this. If you land in a system that's different than that which you know, you can only measure that system with what you know. That's why we can never make a correct decision. When the guy lands on the planet, he wants to know how hard the rock is. Hard in relation to what? His own hand. Somebody had a foot that was 12 inches long, and the whole system of scales developed on that. So we talk about texture, and remember in closing, I just want to say that the thing I've always said, if a flea lands on water, he says it's hard and viscous, and an elephant says it's soft. It's very fluidy. And the flea says, no, it's a thick, viscous substance that I and my family walk on. And when I read your Bible about Jesus walking on water, I've never known a flea that couldn't. In other words, but these people speak the truth. These things speak the truth. And the truth is that there's no truth. There can be no truth. And a truth seeker has to be an idiot. Because he wants to get down to the basics, as though there were 7 basic systems. Well, the human has 6 senses, or he has 4 senses. He has a sense of touch, and a sense of smell, and a sense of sight. And he has a topographical sense of the position of things in a room. He has a spatial sense in relation to various elevations. He has an inverted sense. He can also remember whether he had any hot coffee, an internal sense, proprioceptive, extraceptive sense. He has a sense of the position of his fingers behind his back. You put him in that position, and then say restructure, you can assume it again. They have thousands of variations, of combinations. And the people that try to simplify things, they're the 7 basic laws of wisdom. I always see books like that. It makes me sick when you think of the 3 roads to cosmic consciousness. You know what I mean? And all that kind of cat shit. The basic things you look for in a particular thing. There can be some clues to finding some of the answers, but not the 7 basic laws of wisdom. Whenever you see that, you'll scratch it. All right. Yes.
You say for the scientific method to be purely scientific, you can't have a rigid goal. Is that what you said?
You can't be a human being, and you can't have a set or a frame of reference.
So there's no such thing as a scientific method.
Exactly.
But then you said, though,
there are degrees of
about this
appropriateness.
bridge to nowhere, that we have to have a goal. What is this? This seems contradictory.
Yes. If you have a goal, something you want over here, your behavior is moving generally toward that goal with some degree of deviation. The motivation is the goal. The deviation is the background that interfered with your direction of the goal, your economics, etc. You don't have enough money to get what you want. You know what I mean? Or you don't have the clothing to visit for an appointment that's important to you.
This has nothing to do with the scientific method.
Well, what happens? The scientific method is if you want people to produce, give them a goal. If you want people
you do
to
have a goal to the scientific method.
I would say that a guy working in a lab, real fastidious, say, what are you working on? He says, I wish I knew. I mean,
you just said when they work for cancer, they're not quite sure what they do.
That's right. They don't know what they're working on.
And they should. They should have a more... How can they? I thought you said
that was the guy comes up to me and says, I'm interested in behavioral problems. I'm interested in studying human behavior. I said, well, what do you mean by human behavior? He says, well, something about the will of a person, how they feel about things. Well, suppose they don't feel any way about things. Suppose their feelings are generated by society. Suppose they're generated by, you drink a certain fluid and the tongue reacts to it when you burn your inside. Suppose your feelings are acted upon rather than your own feelings. Suppose they're pre-structured. You know, like the Oriental behaves in a certain way because he's been structured to do that. Now, are you concerned about the range of behavior that can be inflicted upon man? I use the term inflicted or infected. That man can be infected with certain types of behavior. Love, jealousy, whatever. He's infected by society. Contagious disease lands on you and you get the itch. Now, if people land on you and you hate Jews, Negroes, Swedes, or whatever, you get infected by values. But if you look for the source of infection, like the stupidity of medicine was an aspect where they dissected Einstein's brain once to see if they can find something special, like the neurons clad in stainless steel, running in a straight path, to see if there was a difference. Now, a stupid brain has just as many associations as a well-ordered brain, and they don't look crazy. The associative system of a disoriented person doesn't look like that. It's just as linear. A fascist has Jews, Negroes, Swedes in a beautiful linear fashion. And when you look at Einstein's brain, they're not ordered and structured beautifully, just like the Pope's brain. It's just the quality of associations are different. So they always want to know whether an intelligent mind, what it's like, as though intelligence had a quality that it left behind in the cells. Now, let me state this. If somebody said to you, you just won this amount of money and you now have all these problems solved and all that thing, if you don't jump for joy, the person doesn't understand you. They got people on television that jump for joy when they win a prize. But if you just said, I did, you stuck out your hand, took the prize, and walked over the shoulder, I said, the guy would be very disappointed. It may cause everybody to crack up, or they may think you're a shill. But the whole idea of a certain type of behavior is expected of you. And we feel guilty and ashamed if we don't behave according to pattern. How come they succeeded then in making us cops over ourselves? We are policemen. They go around arresting ourselves every day. I shouldn't screw around with his wife. I did it. I committed an evil thing. And I'm arresting myself. And I'm weeping. And I'm confessing. But I enjoy doing it. The whole idea, the whole confusion of things is they made policemen of you. Okay, any questions? Okay, any questions? Okay, any questions? Okay, any questions? Okay.